topic I'm going to talk about is Rizal's unfinished research project, recovering Philippine history, prehistory, and the Philippine-Marianas connection circa 1500 BC. Let me start with a passage from a poem, and I'd like to ask my viewers to guess who this author is. Whoever guesses it correctly will receive a free copy of my A Nation Aborted. Spain's deathless shame, the crimes of modern days, when avarice, shrouded in religion's robe, sailed to the west. Oops, I got lost there, sorry. And slaughtered half the globe. That's a famous author, by the way, and let me know if you can guess it at the end of my lecture. Now, when Rizal, by the time Rizal was about in his mid-20s, he started being concerned about the prehistoric past of the Philippines, and he went to the British Library to study to research on his country's past, and he chose to annotate Sucesos de las Islas Filipinas by Antonio Morga. At that time, he had already done considerable work and some translation of a previous ethnologist, in fact, the greatest German ethnologist at that time, Theodor Weiss. But he forgot all about it, and he decided to work on the Morga. So what did Rizal miss by dropping Weiss and concentrating on Morga? That's the main impetus for my research.
Apo.
And so you can hear me, right?
Apo.
Hello?
Yes.
Okay. The result of his about 4 or 5 months work in the British Museum, he went there every day. And every time he went there, he passed by the house of Friedrich Engels, who was just 150 meters away from his own residence. And the product of his intensive research working on the Morga, and all the other available sources at that time written by mostly Spanish missionaries, and like the Jesuit Father Colin, Father Chirino, and the other missionary priests, missionary philologists. The product of that research was basically 2 of his, I would say, greatest scholarly essays. Sobre la indolencia de los Filipinos and Filipinas dentro de 100 años. And I will concentrate on the Filipinas dentro de 100 años because this links me to the topic I'm going to talk about. When he after having gone through all the materials that taken hold of, he came to the conclusion that the underdevelopment of the country was due to its having been colonized by Spain. So at the end of that, towards the end of that essay, he wrote, then they, meaning the Filipinos, declined. Degrading themselves in their own eyes, they became ashamed of what was their own. They began to admire and praise whatever there was foreign, incomprehensible. I'm getting lost, just a minute. And their spirit was broken and surrendered. But the most important part of that essay, Pilipinas dentro de 100 años, the Philippines a century hence, was his steering statement towards the end of the essay when he said, and it sounds so good in Spanish, let me read to you the Spanish. Y libre otra vez, como el ave que deja la aula, como la flor que vuelve al aire libre, volverá a recobrar las antiguas buenas calidades que poco a poco va perdiendo y será otra vez amante de la paz, jovial, alegre, sonriente, hospitalario y audaz. What he's saying here is, and free once more, like the bird that leaves his cage, like the flower that like the flower that returns to the open air, the Filipinos will recover the good old qualities they are losing little by little, and once again become lovers of peace, jovial, cheerful, smiling, hospitable, and daring. That was the goal of Rizal, to achieve that kind of society in which Filipinos will flourish and realize their full potential. And so that was a seminal achievement because no other Filipinos has done that before. And going back to the past and assessing exactly what we lost under Spanish colonialism and weighing down what we gained and what we lost. And he came to the conclusion that we lost more than we gained. But there were other problems with the Morga in which he seems to have been misled. Like one of the things that Morga said was those of Manila, the natives of Manila and its vicinity were not natives of this island, but came thither in the past and colonized it. Of course, I'm reading the, I'm saying the English translation, and that they are Malay natives and come from other islands and remote provinces. To this, Rizal came out with a footnote. The ancient traditions made Sumatra the original home of the Filipino Indians. Now, this is a gross error, as I will show later, but apparently Rizal found it acceptable that the original homeland of the Filipinos, the native Filipinos, was Sumatra. Actually, this came from the Spanish missionary philologist, notably Francisco Colin, who wrote a piece on 1663, and the Franciscan father Juan Francisco de San Antonio. And they claim that Philippine languages are descended from the Malay language, the language spoken in the peninsula of Malacca. And peninsula of Malacca is now called Sumatra and Borneo. And that has become part of our consciousness, especially since they picked it up and gave it an aura of scientific credibility to it. And so he came out with the waves of migration theory, which is very similar to what Father Francisco Colin was claiming. When I was studying in high school and in the University of the Philippines, this is what we were taught, the waves of migration theory, and that the Filipinos came from Borneo and Sumatra. And this has in fact become deeply ingrained in popular culture. And I had my last thought at the Asian Center in 2000, from 2004 to 2009. I heard from some parents that their kids were still learning this waves migration theory and that the Filipinos came from Indonesia. In fact, that is the basis of festivals like, our Dinagyang Festival in Iloilo. It's based on the story of the 10 Bornean Datus who lived in the Philippines and then, started driving away the Negritos, the Aitas, and started colonizing Panay. And they celebrate this every year. It's a wonderful celebration, spectacular, and I recommend that it's worth watching. Although the story behind it should be taken with a grain of salt. In fact, we now know that it was the other way around, that the Indonesians came from the Philippines. And this is now the accepted theory that the Indonesians, the people of Sumatra, the people of Borneo actually came from the Philippines. I will deal more with this later. And so that that was as far as Morga goes, and results was misled in a way, as I mentioned. What he missed was a, a brilliant work that he actually started working on, and that is by the leading German ethnologist of that time, probably the leading ethnologist of Europe at that time, Theodor Weitz. He was started working on the Malayan or Malay, the Malays, which is part one, 194 pages of volume 5. It's actually, the work of Weitz is actually in 6 volumes. Volume 5 is the people of the South Seas, the Volca der Sudsee. And the 6th-volume work is entitled Anthropology of Primitive Peoples, literally translated. The second part of volume 5, about 250 pages, deals with Micronesia and Polynesia. And volume 6 deals with Polynesia, Melanesia, the Australians, and the Tasmanians. Now, this is the problem. So these are the two authors. Actually, the, the main author was, hello? Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. The main author, of course, is Theodor Weitz, and his student was George Gerland, George Gerland. But before he could publish the work, and so it fell upon George Gerland to edit it and work on it. So when it finally came out, volume 5 and volume 6, it was actually credited to Weitz and Gerland. It would have been wonderful if Rizal focused on these two, because not only were they the progressive politically, they were anti-racist, and they decried the impact of colonialism on native peoples. And what they were saying actually supports all that Rizal said is la indolencia de los Filipinos and Filipinas dentro de 100 años. And sometimes it just occurred to me last night that what if Rizal was actually picking up ideas from Weitz and Gerland, but since he forgot about the two, he forgot that he was actually citing them when expressing ideas that they have already expressed. Now, this is the problem. I came across this work of Weitz through the National Historical Institute, which published 10 pages and entitled it Melanesia, Malasia, Polynesia, Notes by Rizal. So the National Historical Institute, from 1961 to the present, has not changed this error. It's an error, claiming that Melanesia, Malasia, Polynesia, which is only about 10 pages, were written by Rizal. The fact is, these were the first 10 pages of Rizal's translation, direct translation of Weitz's first 10 pages of the Malayan. And so it is misleading to call it written by Rizal, authored by Rizal, when in fact Rizal was just, I was able to verify this by going to the New South Wales library and getting hold of the old original Weitz manuscript, which was kept in the rare manuscript section. And I compared Rizal's Melanesia, Malasia, Polynesia, written in Spanish, with the Malayan, written by Weitz Gerland. And I found out that it was a word for word, sentence for sentence, paragraph for paragraph, footnote for footnote, direct translation. There is no question that that Rizal was merely translating and not writing a note. The second problem with the National Historical Institute publication is that it has a lot of mistranslations. For example, the 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 island Isla de Pascua in Rizal's text was translated twice, and so it's not a typographical error because this occurred twice as Christmas Island, as if the translator thought that Pascua meant Christmas, when in fact Isla de Pascua is Easter Island. Pascua referring to Easter, and it's a Dutch. It was from a Dutch explorer who named it uh, uh, Isla de Pascua in Spanish, but it was originally in Dutch. Christmas Island is southwest of Indonesia. It's exactly the opposite of the very opposite of Easter Island if you look at the globe. So that's a horrible mistranslation. There are some others. And so I invite my listeners now with that long introduction to go on a journey with me, starting with using as our boat Theodore Weit's work. Do you see my
Picture?
Yeah, we
brought
can see it.
everything.
We see it, Floro.
Yeah,
We see it.
they brought everything. You know, the pigs, the chickens. So this was the second part of the first part was to explore, to find an island. Once they find an island, then they organize the community to move there, and they bring everything. So it's like a migration, a real migration. The first part of exploration is just to look for islands, and that's where people say navigators, voyagers could die and never return if they miss an island. But once they find the island, they come back. They become celebrities in that community, and so they are able to organize the whole community. That's the beginning of datus and chiefs. They're the ones who are the master navigators of old. And okay, we start with Weitz. Weitz actually was synthesizing all the state of the art, all the advanced knowledge at the time. And one of the works that he did was one of the things that he discussed that Rizal translated was finding of Humboldt. And through a study of the different languages, he started with the language in Java, and then started all the other languages in the Pacific as well as Madagascar. He realized that they all share a family. And so all of these islands are, though they are spread around the, you know, throughout the Pacific Ocean and the Indian Ocean, as far as the Indian Ocean, in the case of Madagascar, they share the same language family. And so there was no question to Humboldt that all these islands, all the peoples in these islands actually came from the Philippines. But although the homeland originally, as you can see, is Formosa. Now, this was in the 1830s, this early. And Weitz came out with a very interesting question based on the work of Humboldt. And this is in the 10 pages translation of Rizal. He raises the question, if the countries of the Malays, uh, meaning island Southeast Asia, Philippines, Malaysia, Indonesia now, are considered the most probable homeland of the Polynesians, that's the position of Humboldt. The next question is, when did this emigration occur? Now, to solve that problem, Humboldt found a capital difference between Malay and the Polynesian languages. between the languages of island Southeast Asia and the languages of uh, Polynesia. In the complete lack of Sanskrit terms in the Polynesian languages, while such terms are quite abundant in the language of the Tagalogs and other Malays. And then White says, presupposing the correctness of this fact, so he's not very dogmatic, like he's not saying that this is an established fact. Because in those days, they were just theorizing based on their linguistic studies. So it can be inferred, according to Weitz, that from this we can infer the conclusion that the Polynesian brands separated from the common trunk, by common trunk we mean Southeast Asia, in particular the Philippines, at a time when Sanskrit did not yet have any influence on this. That is to say, before the beginning of the Christian era. This is a wonderful insight. He was able to tell at what time they must have emigrated, they must have left. They left at a time when Sanskrit has not yet arrived in the Philippines. That was before the beginning of the Christian era. And this to me leads to a lot of implications that I will discuss shortly. Because what we have been focusing in prehistory is things that actually happened during after Sanskrit arrived. You know, Sanskrit from India, then you have China, influences from China, and Islamic influences, you know, and so on and so forth. Yet we haven't actually concentrated on what was the Philippines like before these influences came. And so this is an area of research that we can get into, which I'm going to go into now. When I went to New Zealand some months ago before COVID struck, I went to a wonderful museum, the War Memorial Museum in Auckland, which had a whole building, a whole floor devoted to a museum on Oceania and the Pacific. But I was struck by their map, which was occupied the whole a whole wall in their Pacific section, and the map was like this, as you can see. Now, what is striking about this map is what is missing in it. It's like there was no interest at all as to the connection between the Philippines and the Marianas. I'm referring to this area. This is the Marianas, that part is Guam. Can you see my arrow?
Yes.
Okay. So I stood there pretending to be a staff of the museum, talking to children, school children, explaining that this part is the missing part. And then I explained how they got populated until, of course, the real employee came and told me to shut up. Anyway, 2013, Blast, who is a professor emeritus now at the University of Hawaii. As far as the linguists are concerned, it's pretty established. The connection from Taiwan, then you have a cluster here, the Western Malay Polynesian involving the Philippines, Indonesia, Madagascar, and Marianas. And then you have the Central Polynesia, Central Malay Polynesia, and then you have South Halmahera, West New Guinea, and then you have what we normally call Eastern Oceania and Polynesian. This is as far as linguistics is concerned. This is pretty much settled in linguistics. And recently, also another linguist by the name of Lawrence Reid, tried to synthesize archaeological evidence with linguistic evidence, and this time he put an arrow linking the Philippines to Guam. So this is again the consensus as far as as far as archaeology and linguistics are concerned, this is now the consensus that you can trace all of these languages all the way back, in fact, to the Philippines. Now, what about genetics? Well, the genetics recently, a consortium of more than 30 linguists, geneticists, did a study, the genomic insights in the peopling of the South Pacific, and they were able to establish that the area of Lapita, Tonga, Toma, Samoa, this area, can be traced, the DNA can be traced all the way back to the Philippines and Taiwan. In fact, they were able to establish a link of the genes among Tongans in this area all the way to the Kankanai of northern Luzon and all the way to Taiwan. But the word Kankanai became prominent. And this was continued to 2018. I'm talking now of the latest studies. By Hujasov and Endicott. They were able to trace, the Kankanai genes all the way to Leeward Society Islands. And by Leeward Society Islands, we mean places like Bora Bora, Raitea. Bora Bora is the setting for the Marlon Brando film, if you remember, Mutiny on the Bounty. So we are actually related even to the Tahitians. And again, the genes that the DNA that came out was Kankanai. I'm talking about the latest genetic studies. But what about the connection between Guam and Marianas? Again, this is the latest. This has not been published yet, actually. I was able to get a preview of this article, which is waiting to be published by geneticists and by a husband and wife team of duo of archaeologists, Mike T. Carson and his wife, Xiao Chun Hung. And together, the team were able to trace DNA, direct DNA from the Philippines to the Marianas. So there is no question now. The only problem is this. And I will go to that now. So they published their work in 2011 as and it was led by the husband and wife team, Hung and Carson, of course, Peter Bellwood. Everybody knows Peter Bellwood. And I'm happy to say that 3 Filipinos were involved here: Florderisa Campos, Eusebio Dizon, and Mary Jane Louise Bolugna. And Mary Jane Louise Bolugna was a little student assistant when I was teaching at the UP Manila. I didn't know that she will become a distinguished archaeologist, and I'm so happy for her that she was part of this team. I hope he's watching right now, because I invited her to watch. And this was, as far as they're concerned, in terms of pottery, and this is the sequence. This is the sequence. So the first ever emigration was in fact the most difficult one. Philippines to the Marianas. And I'll explain later why this was the most difficult. And this was the longest in human history. The longest ocean crossing ever. And the most difficult one that Spanish explorers were not able to solve until the 17th century. And I will come to that later. But seafarers from the Philippines were doing it 3,500 years ago. What was their secret? I'll talk about that shortly. The problem is this. Another group of, there are 2 groups of archaeologists who actually vehemently rejected that thesis. The group of Olaf Winter, Geoffrey Clark, Athol Anderson, they're from ANU and New Zealand. And they claim that if you look at the sailing conditions and the history and the record of historical voyages, the sailing conditions would make it improbable that they could do that, and explain what the reasoning is behind this. And then they claim that there are no record of any historical voyage at that time, even during the Spanish period, that this was successfully done. And so they propose that this is, instead of the Philippines to Marianas, they say most likely if you look at the currents and the wind directions, most likely it came from somewhere in Indonesia. And if this is true, that means the Chamorros were originally Indonesians and not the natives of the Philippines. Of course, there's a big difference there. And it would also mean that there was nothing so exceptional about the crossing, because this would be, it would be easier to do this given the prevailing winds in Indonesia than going straight from the Philippines to the Marianas. And then these two guys from the University of Oregon and the University of Calgary came out with a computer simulation. And according to them, their computer simulation yielded zero probability of any voyage being possible from the Philippines to the Marianas. So they're saying that's out of the question. The only most likely possibilities from somewhere from Indonesia. And this is their computer results. See, from direct voyages to the Marianas Islands. From Taiwan, it's zero the whole year. From Luzon, it's zero. From Mindanao, it's zero the whole year. But when you go to the area between Mindanao and the Bismarck Archipelago, then you have a chance. You have some probability. If you travel between July, August, September, October, November. But for Mindanao, for Luzon, for Taiwan, it's zero probability. Now, to my surprise, the group of Mike T. Carson, Hugh Hung, Bellwood, and the Filipino archaeologists have not responded to this. And in fact, Mike T. Carson, in their latest article, said that everything now coheres: linguistics, archaeology, genetics. The only thing that is not does not cohere, is not does not coincide with the other evidence, is the computer simulation. The computer simulation disputes all of that because it says it's practically impossible. The question now is, what should we believe now, the computer simulation or linguistic, archaeological, genetic evidence? This is where I come in, and this is my solution, because they claim that there is no historical evidence and it hasn't been done before. And the reason is this: the trade winds coming from the east to the west. The wind is blowing from east to west. So how can you sail if you are sailing using the wind? How can you sail against the wind? That's their main objection. And another historian, Greg Bankoff, even explained Magellan's voyage and the galleon trade by looking at the trade winds and saying that from Manila to Acapulco and then back to Guam and then the Philippines, that is the only way they could do it. That's the only way the galleon can do it. So that at that time, although Guam, this is Hawaii, by the way, Guam should be here. Although Guam was, the Marianas was directly under the jurisdiction of the Spanish colonial government, every time they had to send supplies, every time they had to send aid, every time they had to send personnel, they could not send it directly. They had to go all the way to Acapulco, and then from Acapulco to Guam, and then the Philippines, following the currents. This is the reasoning of Greg Bankoff. Except that you know, he gets several things wrong. One of them, glaringly, he calls this currents the Kuroshio current, when in fact it is not the Kuroshio current, it is the Oyashio current. The Kuroshio current is this one. So this is the graph, the chart for the galleon trade, from the Philippines, from Manila. They cannot go directly to Guam, so they have to go all the way to Acapulco, and then because the current is the winds are from east to west, then it's smooth sailing from Acapulco to Guam, back to Manila. But the problem there is whenever you have to be in Guam, you have to do it 1 year. It will take you almost a year to reach Guam from the Philippines because you cannot go directly. And this will become a problem for the Spaniards later on, as I will show. Let me skip all this to save time. Now, this is where I come in. So I was concerned about the claim that there was no historical record. I went to the, fortunately, the New South Wales Library has a collection of the 20 volumes of sources, documents, archival documents, all compiled by Levesque. Of course, I had to go through all these because you cannot just find this in any table of contents or in any index. I have to go through all the manuscripts. I had to read about 10 volumes. I couldn't possibly read 20 volumes. That would be too much. And I discovered that proa voyages, proa, the flying proa, were being done, return voyages from Guam to Manila and back to Guam were being done in the 17th century. And the Jesuits observed this. And in fact, from my reading of their documents, I was able to, it took me some while to get this, as I had, because you have to read every document in order to find this. They recorded the voyages between the Manila and Guam done by Chamorros on their proa voyages in 1639, 1676, 1681, 1683, and 1693. In fact, in 1693, it was explicitly stated that it was the voyage was sent there. All of these were, by the way, official missions. And then this, especially this one was mentioned that, the Chamorro, the proa carrying Chamorros and Filipinos went specifically to talk with the Governor General and then returned in Guam later. Now, this is the problem. The Jesuit mission led by the Spanish Jesuits, led by Father San Vitores, arrived in Guam in 1668. And the first thing that they did, they were impressed by the Chamorros. I will discuss this later on. They found them very amazing. So amazing that they started worrying, what will happen to these people if they are not baptized? Too bad, they will all go to hell. And so they made it their commitment to convert them. Otherwise, they believed sayang, no, too much. They were such a beautiful, wonderful people. They have to be saved, even whether they liked it or not. And they started baptizing in haste, save these people. They started baptizing left and right. In those days when you baptize, you kiss the baby. And unfortunately, the Chamorros, who have been isolated for thousands of years, did not have any immunity to the European germs. And so the infants were dying. The first few months, hundreds of infants died. Of course, the Chamorros will resist. And of course, the Jesuits knew this. The Jesuits knew that children in Chamorro culture were very valued. That's the most important member of the family is a child.
Of course.
And you're baptizing the child, and the child ends up getting killed, dying. The cause of the death is obviously you're kissing the child and baptizing it. So they refuse to be baptized. And Father Hamarillo, Father San Vitores, who is now beatified and called blessed, when there was resistance, called in the Marines, so to speak. He called in the soldiers. We have to baptize these people whether they like it or not. Bring in the soldiers. Now, keep in mind, folks, that Spaniard, when you talk of a military force, a Spanish military force, you're talking only of the Spaniards as the officers. The rank and file, the soldiers were actually Filipinos.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this is the problem. There was a rebellion, and you needed arms, you needed supplies, you needed soldiers, but you had to wait 1 year before the supply would arrive. And so they had that urgent crisis, you know, we need supplies, we need soldiers. There is a rebellion. The mission is at stake. Otherwise, it won't survive. And they were frantically appealing to the governor. He said, create a line, a direct voyaging line, direct sailing line from Manila to Guam, so that the one year can be shortened to 1 month. That's how urgent it was. Of course, the Governor General, like the archaeologists today who came out with the computer simulation, said it was impossible. And this is what clinched the deal was Father Hamarillo and Father Cumans approached the Governor General and said, look, we know that the Chamorros have been doing this. All you need to do for the pilots is to study how the Chamorros were doing it. And that's what they did. And so in 1683, based on the pilots who studied how to do it, of course, learning from the example of the Chamorros, they were able to solve it. In 25 days, they were able to successfully negotiate. I don't have to go through this, it's a long story. They were able to negotiate the so-called impossible passage from Manila to Guam. I will tell you the secret later on that they learned from the Chamorros. Keep in mind that the explorers did not know this for so many hundreds of years. And the direct Manila to Guam line was established only in 1683, only because there was an urgent need for supplies, because there was a rebellion. And so since then, a direct line was established. There was no more problem. And because a direct line was established, they were able to send Filipino soldiers, many of them Kapampangan, my ancestors. And because these Kapampangan soldiers were fierce, they ended up destroying the rebellion. I will come to that later on. And no wonder up to now, I think there's still that deep-seated resentment against Filipinos by the Chamorro. I don't blame them, but no, they don't realize, however, that genetically they came from the Philippines and that genetically we are cousins. Now, Chodorvites was not worried about this idea about going against East and West. He said, las excursiones y migraciones desde I mean, this is Rizal's translation, desde el archipiélago Índico hasta la Polinesia, de ninguna manera ofrecían insuperables obstáculos para pueblos acostumbrados a la navegación, meaning the excursions and migrations from the Indian archipelago, meaning Southeast Asia, up to Polynesia did not present any insurmountable obstacles for people accustomed to navigation. Chodorvites understood that people who knew navigation would not be deterred by this so-called sailing against prevailing winds and currents because they knew how to do it. They knew what to do. And that's what the Spaniards learned from the Chamorros. But don't forget that the Chamorros came from the Philippines. So the knowledge was there in us, among the natives. And what was their flying proa? The so-called flying proa is the design by the buccaneer, pirateer Anson, and it has a strange design. But this design, I won't have time to do this, but I'll explain it later in the open forum. Uh, you can see that one side is straight, you know. The hull is asymmetrical. And only the other side is curved, and that curved side is where the outrigger is, and that is the outrigger is on the curved side, and that's where the sail is. So when the wind blows like this, of course the outrigger goes up. And if you are not a skilled navigator, there'll be a problem of it going down. It's just like surfing, windsurfing. If you're not a skilled windsurfer, the wind will be too strong and the sail will go down. But it is precisely because of this design that the explorers call the work of genius, that they have not seen anywhere else, that the flying proa was so fast. Literally, it was flying because when the wind is right and the boat is at its maximum speed, the the outrigger actually goes up. And so there is absolutely no water resistance whatsoever. And because there is a reason for this being flat, because this prevents it from dragging from a leeward drag. So the boat can go straight. More of this later. So that's why this is in a Carolinian proa, which is I think an evolution from the Chamorro proa. That you can see that as the wind blows, the outrigger goes up. So if you're not skilled, this can fall over, and that's the end of your voyage. So you must be able to balance it. Now, question is, did this exist in the Philippines? Nobody knows now that people assume that this is all just from Chamorro, that we didn't have this in the Philippines until I found this drawing from Rizal. I always learn something from Rizal. I never stopped learning from Rizal, and this is a recent discovery of mine. That Rizal, in fact, did a drawing when he was in Dapitan of a proa, a Philippine proa. And that's exactly how you run it. You have to stand there to balance the trigger because the trigger goes up. That's exactly how you run it. And the wind is blowing from left to right. And the proa is moving towards forward. And so now this is from now. What does this show? That at the time Rizal, they were still proas. What happened? Why did they disappear? That's another research question that right now we cannot go into. Okay, Levesque, who compiled all these documents, theorizes that the outrigger, is tying together two proas, and you have a double outrigger. You have the banca. So he says, two Chamorro proas tied together for deep sea voyaging. This is the likely setup used by Esteban Ramos in 639 to go from Guam to the Philippines. More on Esteban Ramos later on, but during the open forum, maybe I can elaborate. After the wreck of the Galleon Concepcion in Saipan, the resort looks like a Filipino barangay. This is Levesque's hypothesis. I dispute this, although Levesque is an engineer who is also a classics scholar. I dispute this because it won't be stable that way. What I suspect, if you look at the real proa, it's not completely straight. It's slightly curved, but there is an imbalance. One side is narrower than the other side, but it's not actually straight like in the drawing. And when it's not exactly straight like that, you can't really join them together. It would be very unstable. What I suspect though is it that is the they made it into a double hulled canoe. The proas were joined together. The Spanish term was dos barcas atades, two boats tied together. What does two boats tied together mean? It could mean a catamaran like this, which is a Tongyaki double hulled canoe from Tonga. And an artist version would make it look prettier. This is really a long distance voyaging canoe. Now, because a line has been established, again, I'm debating with Fitzgerald, with Fitzpatrick and Callahan, because they kept saying that their computer simulations make it impossible. The result is 0. Again, this is belied by a sailing blog done by Francesco Gemelli Carreri. In 1696 to 1697, he was on board a galleon that traveled from Manila to Acapulco. It stopped over it passed through Guam, and he recorded in his sailing blog the changing currents, and and uh, and they were able to do it. They passed by Marianas. So instead of going around like this, they went straight to Marianas. And why were they able to do that? Well, because by that time, the route has been established, remember? As I said. But I am citing this just to show you why it's possible to do it, despite the so-called computer simulation of uh, Fitzpatrick and Callahan. Now, I'm showing the comics version of Carrera's Voyage, published by the Sunday China Mail Post. They have a feature on the as a comics the Voyage of Carreri, and so I'm using their illustrations. June 29, 1696. The galleon leaves the port of Cavite, and that's how it travels, and it comes out of Embocadero. That's the passage between Sorsogon and Samar, and that's the island of Capul, the island of Ticao, and so by August 10, they start sailing out of the Embocadero, and of course they regularly take readings, as this illustration shows, and this is what they established. You won't get this in the comics, of course. You have to go to the manuscript of Gemello Carreri, and I had to do this page by page to come out with his observations. He did not come out with this table, and this is what I gathered from reading his diary. And you can see that, what do you notice here? The wind is not blowing from east to west, but rather from southwest to east. See, southwest, north, northwest, west, southwest, northwest, north, southwest. What does this mean? It is not true that the winds blow constantly from east to west. In other words, there are times of the year that the wind reverses. Instead of blowing from east to west, it blows from west to east. And you have to find that narrow window of opportunity to be able to sail. And that's what the Chamorros were doing. Now, the first time they really encountered the serious problem was when the wind started blowing from east to west by September 2. So they were actually now sailing against the wind. And of course, the whole thing became crazy, unmanageable. Nobody can come out. The winds were so strong, the waves were so high that they all huddled together and started having mass. And in that panic, in that state of anxiety, and they thought they were going to die, they saw an apparition of Saint Francis. So a kind of a mass hallucination. If you are scientifically inclined, if you are religiously inclined, you say Saint Francis actually appeared and helped them. And are you with me so far?
Yes.
Okay. So finally, August 6th, they spotted the Marianas. And that's it. In other words, I don't know why the group of Carson and Hung and Bellwood were not able to show this to to Fitzpatrick Callahan, that in fact the historical record shows that it's possible to sail. It's a question of waiting for the west wind and adjusting your voyage accordingly as the wind shift changes. So going back to the Marianas, because how much time do I have?
Um, I you have spent 1 hour and 6 minutes already.
Oh my God! Can I just spend that 10 minutes just to conclude?
Okay.
Uh, so what we know of the Chamorros uh, come from the accounts of the Jesuits who converted them. These are 17th century accounts that those who are not um, cannot access the 20 volumes of Levesque wouldn't know this. Uh, the first thing that they noticed was the Chamorros were naked, and they were not wearing anything. What is this? Okay, and this is the description. Physical description. They were naked. They were taller, stronger than Europeans. The women were beautiful. The men were well proportioned. They lived long lives, some up to 100 years. And there are several accounts, which I don't have time to discuss now, of, by their reckoning, one Chamorro man is equivalent in strength to 3 European soldiers. And I can discuss this later if they have time. And but this is one thing that they also noticed: exceptional kindness, care and affection, love of their children, loving their children to a fault, hospitality, cheerfulness, cleanliness, tidiness, and no bad habits such as drinking alcohol, smoking, or gambling. Uh, the emphasis was on kindness, care, affection, and this was not limited to their own tribe. Spanish galleons who were shipwrecked, survivors near Guam. The survivors were able to swim towards Guam, and they were taken care of. They had no problem being taken care of until they got well. And one of them was a captain of the galleon, Ramos, and he survived. And when he got well, he organized a proa to return him to Manila, and that's happened in 1639. That's the record that I'm saying. But at the same time, they hated the fact that the Chamorro system was matrilineal. The women were autonomous. They were equal to the men. It was the very opposite of the patriarchal culture that the Jesuits were considered natural. At least it was natural as far as European Christendom is concerned. The house and the land were owned by women, passed on through the female line. And it was matriarchal. The husband has to move to the land, to the village of the women. So in effect, when a man marries a woman, he lives with the clan of the woman. In a situation like that, you cannot afford to abuse your wife, because the whole clan will go after you and will kick you out of the village. And they hated this. The Jesuits hated this. They said, no, this is female arrogance. This must be This must be erased from uh, Chamorro culture. We have to do away with this. Women cannot be so arrogant like this. Ancestor worship, they hated this also because well, Chamorros have to learn to worship God, Jesus Christ, the saints, Virgin Mary, instead of worshiping their own ancestors. And this is the one that they call the work of the devil's house, Goma Orita, bachelor's house. Now they misunderstood the bachelor's house. They thought it was like a den of prostitution, and they thought that it was women were giving free sex to young men. They misunderstood it. Actually, it was a school in which all the the skills and knowledge of the community were passed on to young men. So they learned about voyaging, they learned about navigation, they learned about how to make a canoe. They learned everything that was needed to learn uh, to become a productive member of the community. But in addition to that, they learned how to love women. And they were tutored by specially selected single women. And the tutoring, what we now call sex education, was not something abstract. It was practical. You might call it now as practicum. They actually had sex with their mentors. So in effect, the women were telling young boys, this is how to make love, and this is how to love women. I suspect that if you want to explain the kindness, the care and affection, the love for their children, the hospitality, the cheerfulness, I think it's because the system was matrilocal and there was no sexual tension or repression, the Guma Uritaw. I'm using, of course, a Freudian psychoanalytic perspective here. But then, this is an example, artist version of the Guma Uritaw. This is how big it was. You know, this famous uh, latte stone pillars, and but with the help of soldiers, they destroyed all these bachelors' houses. They destroyed all these skulls, and they separated the children from their parents. So that the children will be raised away from the pagans, and so that they will be Christianized, be made taught to read, to write, to assist at mass and other Christian costumes. The first example of stolen children, which was a big problem in Australia here because of what the white folks did to the Aboriginal communities. And by the end, Father Morales was bragging the good old customs, what Rizal calls antiguas buenas cualidades, the good old customs are a thing of the past. No more loose marriages. Well, by the way, marriage was, was controlled by the woman. If the woman doesn't like the husband anymore, all he has to do is say, "Go away. I don't like you anymore." It's as simple as that, and that's why the priests were horrified. The initiative can come from the woman, and all to see is, "Look, I'm not happy with you. Go away. I want another husband." This is unacceptable to the Jesuits. No public houses, meaning Guma Uritaw. And then this is curious. No more habit of inflicting love bites and scratches. What's wrong with that? That's how affectionate they were. They were simply what the Jesuits call love bites, and scratches. These were the shows. And so they said they have succeeded, but at what cost? Well, if you combine this Jesuit the entradas, the ruthless military pacification thanks to Filipino soldiers, the reduction, forced relocation, were relocated, taken away from their villages. That's how the rebellion was defeated. Epidemics, they brought germs that the Chamorros did not have any immunity to, all led to the decimation of the 90%. But it was not just a genetic, biological decimation, but it was culturally as well, because as I've read to you the report of the Jesuits, they've destroyed all the what they hated, the matrilineal culture and the Guma Arwita, which in my mind, institutions that created this personality of kindness, generosity, affection, and cheerfulness. Now, if I were to put that in a mathematical formula using a rule of logic from Principia Mathematica, this is how it will be. P implies Q, where P is the culture of kindness, matrilineal system, and Guma Urita is the Q. If you deny the Q, you deny the P. By destroying the matrilineal system Guma Urita, you destroy the culture of kindness. And now, has it disappeared? No, because Ifaluk, an island somewhere in Yap, apparently continued the tradition of not wearing anything, especially a bob, like this shows. This is the an Ifaluk maiden. This is the scene that confronted the Jesuits. How do they deal with this? You know, they had an ingenious solution. And their ingenious solution, and this is again, I found out in their account, is don't look straight. Look above the head so you don't see what you're not supposed to see. And this is this example typifies it there. That this is San Vittore. So if he looks very holy, actually he's avoiding looking at the breast. I hope I'm not being blasphemous here to people who believe in Father San Vittore. This is a graduation ceremony. These are high school kids graduating, and this is their attire. And this is these are the girls, and behind are the boys. And it's so natural to them. They can be together without thinking of anything. You know, these are teenagers, and see, they're seated beside this young girl, who is naked from the waist up, and it was natural to them. And what is this Ifalo culture? And this is what I found out. According to a publication by Laura Betchig, Ifalok mothers live in an average of 4 other adult women on their matrilineal estates. Other adults, especially close older female kin, associate often with their children, and having living mothers, sisters, and daughters may have a positive effect on the number of children they produce. This is Chamorro. This is Chamorro before the Jesuits came. And then other psychologists observed the baby is king in Ifaluk. Not only are babies desired, and not only are all their desires satisfied, but they are the constant center of attention. Again, this is Chamorro. And this was what was destroyed by the Jesuits. Now, it is not, matrilineal culture is not exceptional and unique to Chamorro and the Ipaluk. It is found in Minangkabau. These are the women of Minangkabau in Sumatra, West Sumatra. And this is their, they call this the longhouse, Ruma, R-U-M-A-H. It is the same meaning, it has the same meaning as Guma. Guma means house. Ruma in Minang, the language in Minangkabau. And look at this. This is a Minangkabau dancer. It's similar to our pandango, but they were matrilineal. I think I should end there. I have more to say, but I should end there so that I can listen to the reactions and the question and answer. Can I ask for help? I feel like getting out of Zoom and then signing in again so that I can see your faces, because in my screen you don't appear at all. I don't know what I should click at this point.
You click share screen again. Try clicking share screen again. You like to get out
New
of your,
share.
right? Yeah, the share screen, and then it will ask you if you like to get out of, if you like to close that screen. Try it, Flora.
Select an application. stop share. There. There, I see you now.
Yeah, you're back.
Okay. Well,
Very good. So thank you very much, Sir Floro, for the very thought-provoking lecture.